start, we're going to clean the bezels with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. I'm going to take a toothpick and dip it into a little bit of rubbing alcohol. The Nunn design pieces are cast in lead-free pewter, and then these are plated with a .999 fine silver and 24 karat gold and copper. Then after that we oxidize the pieces, and that puts a little blackening, which is great when you have a real relief item, because it really highlights all of the little accents. But in some of these pieces, that oxidization is not necessary and can get into the resin and slightly discolor it. So you can see I'm removing the oxidization with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So I'm going down into the center of the bezel and just removing all of that. I'm also doing the tops and the side. Then once you have all your pieces cleaned with the rubbing alcohol, I like to have little cards that I place mine on. This makes it easy for me to move the pieces around on my work surface. Next, we're going to add a little bit of tape onto the back side to close up that hole. And I'm using a U-line packing tape that we have. It's very thick and very durable. And it's much easier when I have it on my tape gun, but I don't. Go ahead and pull a little bit of the tape off. And you want to look for areas on the tape that don't have a lot of modeling. I don't know if you can see, but that modeling, especially on larger pieces, will show up in your resin. On these it won't so much, plus we're using a colorized resin, so it won't show. But if you're using a clear resin, that modeling will matter. So I have a little bit of my packing tape. I placed my bezel down on the piece, and then I'm just burnishing it back and forth, pressing hard, and that's making the contact around that hole so that the resin won't seep out. I like to trim my pieces, trim that excess, because I've often got it stuck on my clothes and whatnot. So it's easiest for me just to go ahead and trim away the tape so that there's less chance of getting that stuck on something. And go ahead and do the other two, and we'll be ready to mix our resin and pour it into the bezels. Now we're ready to add the resin to the bezels. So I'm going to lay down a piece of plastic. I like to do that just so I have a nice surface to work on. And we're going to add first 1 tablespoon of part A and then another tablespoon of part B, and we're going to stir it. Then we're going to add in a little bit of the Casting Craft opaque pigment. I have my phone here, and I'm going to go ahead and set it for 2 minutes and get it ready to go. And once I've added the resin part A and B into the cup, I will start my timer and get to going. So I like to get down right next to where the resin is being mixed so I can see when it hits that 1 tablespoon mark. So I'm down eye to eye with my measuring cup, and I'm just slowly drizzling the resin in there until I hit exactly that 1 tablespoon marker. If you do not have exactly a 1-to-1 ratio of the resin, of part A and part B, that could be an issue in the curing. It's very, very exact. So it's taken me forever, but I'd rather get it right spot on than have too much. So as you saw, as I started to hit that part, that one tablespoon mark, I kind of lifted up, twisted the cap so I stopped pouring, and then I'm just cleaning the top of it before I put the lid back onto the bottle. Then with the part B, you add in the same amount up to that 2 tablespoon mark, and you have to put part A in first and then part B. It is a weight thing, and it too has to be exactly the same. Up to that 2 tablespoon mark, it's starting just to hit that, where that little teeny mark is, and when I have it, I twisted the top to stop the flow and clean the top of any of that resin that's on the top. Put the lid back on, and now we are ready to stir. So I have my timer all set at the 2-minute part, and I can push start and start to stir the resin. So I have a nice fat stir stick. You can see when the resin first starts mixing together part A and B, it's kind of a milky white, and you can see all the striations within the resin. It kind of looks a little goopy, clumpy. Scraping the sides of the stir stick and then scraping the sides of the cup. It's pretty full, so I'm taking my time. I do have spillage, and that's why I like to work on the plastic. It just makes the cleanup so much easier. I can just use my wet wipe and wipe down my little Ziploc bag and just reuse the bag over and over again. You want to stir for 2 minutes, and depending on the humidity and the temperature of your room, you ideally want to have your room around 70 to 73 degrees. If it gets too hot in the room, your working time of using the resin shortens, and the resin will start to get extremely hot in the cup, and then will harden much faster. So ideally you want to have the room around the 70 to 73 mark. You also want to have your resin brought up to temperature, so if the room is really cold, you might want to put it in some warm water until it is lukewarm, and then start mixing your resin. And there's my time. Turn my timer off. And now we're ready to add some colorant. Since I want to use this resin for other purposes, I'm just going to mix 1 tablespoon in another cup. So I'm going to pour 1 tablespoon. It's not so important. Actually, I'm just going to do 1 teaspoon on this one. There's all kinds of color formulas for using the resin on our website, and I'm going to use just the white, but the formulas are based off of that one teaspoon. And then there's various formulas of different colorants to achieve all kinds of different Pantone colors. I just used a light squirt in there. I'm going to go back in with my stir stick. You can either use your fat one, or there's some skinny ones that you can use to mix in the colorant into the resin. So the rule of thumb with the colorants is you're not supposed to use more than 10% of the colorant to resin ratio. Otherwise, the piece will, it'll affect the curing time. So if I didn't like the opaqueness of that, if it was still a little bit too runny, I could add some more colorant, but that looks really good to me. All right, another thing, same here, I tend to want to wipe off my colorant and then put the cap right on, because I have put the wrong color caps on many times. It makes a mess. All right, now we have our colorants and we're ready to add the colorant onto the bezels. So bring our bezels back down. We'll just start with these two, and I'm going to use a toothpick on this. At first I'm going to just add a small amount into the bezel and fill that little hole area. And then, so I don't want to touch that tape because my fingers have often got stuck on there. So I use another toothpick to move that around. So by putting this in here first and then moving this around into the base, I am dislodging any air bubbles that might have gotten trapped against the tape and where the bezel has made contact. So I'm just using a little bit of that first pour time, going in and agitating the resin with my toothpick. I'm going to be doing a second pour on these. I'm going to lay some organics on top of this white color and then pour clear over it. So I'm not wanting, you see my fingers got stuck, I'm not wanting to fill it so it's domed, because then it'll be hard for me to lay my organics on. So I'm just bringing it up to the base of the bezel, and then I'm going to let that cure. And I don't want it to be concaved either, so I'm just trying to get it nice and flat there. And let me show you this one. Down into the base, just putting enough down there at the beginning so I can fill that hole. Then using a toothpick, I grabbed a clean one so I can hold it, and then just move my toothpick around that circled edge to break any contact. Often there's air bubbles that can get stuck down in there. I'm drizzling a little bit more of the resin. I like to use the toothpicks because it's much easier to just add it slowly and then clean it up versus cleaning it up if you add too much. And bringing that resin over to those side edges. This is just a matter of practice. It's going to feel really awkward, and I'm using the toothpicks like little chopsticks to kind of manipulate things. You can see that there's some air bubbles that are just teeny tiny little ones inside of there, and to release those, use your hot breath like in a huff, like that, and it'll make the bubbles, the air in there expand and the bubbles will pop. So I'm gonna bring it off camera and huff. Hold on. So you see some of those little teeny tiny bubbles right in this area. Off camera, move that on there a little more. Off camera, I'm gonna huff. All gone. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and fill the third one, and then we will be ready to let these set aside and cure, and then we'll be ready for adding our organics on the top and some clear resin. Alright, so now my resin has cured in my pieces and I'm ready to put the organics onto the white resin. So I went ahead and mixed another batch of resin and I'm going to put the organics on here now. I want to show you when you're designing with the organics, you'll need to move them around and get a design that you like, and you might need to either trim or alter the organics slightly in order to have it fit your surface that you're working with. On this one, I would need to trim off that little stem a little bit more in order to have it fit just right in this size of the bezel. Or, you know, I might choose a different one so that I didn't have a lot of overhang of the flower right onto the metal. Those are all design decisions that you're going to want to have made before you even mix up your resin, just so you're all ready. Let's go ahead and dress this one. I'll go ahead and show you how you're going to now add the organics onto the piece. So with a little bit of resin, go ahead and put some onto your surface, onto like a little piece of plastic. And kind of move that around, and then place your organics right into the resin and fully coat it. I have found that, especially on flowers, it's just really helpful to pre-coat the piece before you put it in here, because I get a lot of the air bubbles out and the piece is completely coated. Then I'm going to go ahead and put just a tiny bit of resin right onto the piece here. And as you saw, when I pick up my resin, I tend to swirl the toothpick back and forth, and that helps break, like instead of having any kind of strings that come off. And I can also pick up some of my resin if I have too much and place it back in the cup by doing that same sort of technique. Alright, so now I'm ready to go ahead and put my organics right onto this little piece. Just pick it up and lay it down into the bezel, and then slide it into place. And I'm using my toothpick to go in there and press it down and agitate it to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles that are lurking around inside of there. Put it in a position. And then I have quite a bit of resin on here now. I like to bring my resin all the way out to the side edge, and you can do that just by moving the resin with your toothpick. Here's another thing, I like to use multiple toothpicks because it's easy for me to move this tape around and not have it get stuck on my fingers. Alright, so just double check that you don't have any air bubbles, and if you do, you can move them off to the side. Another thing that you can do is use your hot breath. I like to pick up the card. I'm going to move it off of the camera and huff on it. The hot air from my breath makes those bubbles expand and pop. So I'm going to need to watch this for like the next hour as it cures to make sure I don't have any more air bubbles come to the surface, and I can take care of them. Then the next step I'm going to address is once that is cured, so let's imagine that I had this already done, I'm going to remove the tape from the back side. On this, you can see that when I attached my tape onto the back side, I got a lot of overflow coming out of that hole, and that could have been that I just didn't have a very good contact on the piece. But to get that off, what you're going to need to do is use a pair of either needle nose pliers and kind of just get a start of that resin to peel up with the plastic. Or you're going to need to just take the plastic off altogether and then remove it with either a pair of needle nose pliers, or you can use a little piece of your fingernail. But you can see once I got a good start on that, it fairly easily peels right off. This hasn't been curing for more than, I think, 12 hours, so it makes it really easy to remove it when it's sort of in its soft cure state. So go ahead and remove the tape from the back, remove any overflow that you might have had. I'm going to put it back onto a business card. If this surface was sticky, and sometimes it is because you can see that there's a little bit of residue on there from the tape, you want to use a little bit of this stuff. Had this forever. It's great for getting all the stickers off the back of your car once your kid has put stickers all over their window. Put a couple of drops of the Goo Gone onto the piece. The instructions say you're supposed to let it sit, I think it's for 2 or 3 minutes, and then once it's sat for 2 or 3 minutes, you just scrape the goo right off. It just comes right up. I didn't have very much on this one, but after you've scraped it off, you can take a wet wipe and clean away Goo Gone. You can also take, after this is all done, you can take a Q-tip with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and clean it if you want to. And then that would be the finished product. Imagine that all done. Here's some examples of the ones that I did from the tutorial. These are now all finished and ready to be placed onto a necklace or charm bracelet, or even earrings if you did too. This is Becky Nunn, Nunn Design. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed learning about how to use the open back bezels with colorized resin and dried and pressed flowers. Thank you.